Hi everyone, it's Chris. Welcome back to another video. Thank you very much for joining me today. Now, recently I went up to Bristol Record Fair. I generally go to that fair. It's in the Beacon Centre, which used to be called the Colston Hall up in Bristol. It's on every 3 months or so, and I did have about a 9-month hiatus from going, but I've been the last couple of times, and to be honest, I've been a little bit disappointed with it for several reasons. The last time I went, the weather was really poor, so that meant it was busy because everyone was sheltering from the rain. So it was quite busy, and I'm always looking for a bargain. I refuse to spend big money on records. And to be honest, the bargain bins were full of rubbish. They were full of albums I already had, or Roxy Music, Santana, Genesis, Phil Collins, all of that kind of stuff. Well, there was a bargain to be had if you were looking for those albums, but otherwise there were slim pickings really with if you were looking for a bargain. So you had to shell out some serious money if you wanted anything decent. And I don't know about you, but vinyl records have really gone up, and I'm seeing records now for 25, 30, 35, 40 kind of quid, and I'm just not going to pay that amount of money. I just don't think it's worth it, unless it's an album that I really want to complete a discography, usually associated with my favourite band, Deep Purple. But by and large, I'm not prepared to spend that kind of money. And it got me thinking about my collection and where it kind of originates from, that I can remember. And I'm old enough now to remember the kind of halcyon days of the early 90s. And the reason I call them the halcyon days is because it was the CD era, or the start of the CD era, and lots of people were buying CDs and getting rid of their vinyl, and they were taking that vinyl to charity shops. And I was still collecting records in the early 90s. Yes, I did buy CDs. I thought they were a bit overrated. The sound wasn't always that brilliant, and they were very expensive. So I was still buying records. And charity shops were just fantastic places to go in the early 90s. And so what I'm going to share with you today are 10 records that I've picked up in charity shops in the early 90s, probably sort of 90 to 95, 96, that kind of era. Stuff that people were just getting rid of and substituting it with CDs. Some of these are worth a reasonable amount of money, and they're quite sort of treasured parts of my record collection. Let me just share 10 of those with you. So first up is this one. This is Talk Talk and Spirit of Eden from, I think it's 88, 89. So it was a relatively newish album when I picked this up in the early 90s. And this was probably a couple of quid in a charity shop. Now, I know this is quite expensive to buy. In fact, I saw this at Bristol Record Fair for £60, which I thought was just astonishing. It's a good album, kind of, ambient kind of washes of sound, real soundscape stuff. Mark Hollis's very distinctive vocal, very different from the early stuff of today, Talk Talk, those kind of songs, very, very different, progressive almost in its nature, but a really, really good album. I love this album, and I didn't really know much about Talk Talk when I picked up this album in the early 90s, and it's been in my collection ever since, and I love it. So yeah, that was just a couple of quid. What's not to like? This album from 86 I picked up in a charity shop, again would have been just £1, something like that. Hatful of Hollow. So this is kind of a compilation from about mid 80s, 85, 86, of John Peel sessions, Kid Jensen sessions, and some kind of non-album singles. So this has got How Soon Is Now, What Difference Does It Make, William, It Was Really Nothing, This Charming Man, Hand in Glove, Still Ill. It's got some fantastic songs, and for me is one of the greatest Smiths albums. It's a cracker, and just for £1, you would spend big money on some of these albums of that kind of quality. I also saw this at Bristol Record Fair, and this is kind of what sparked me to do this video, and this was up for £30 at the fair, and it's Entertainment by Gang of Four, which is one of my favourite post-punk albums. And in one of the songs on here, Damaged Goods, I think that's one of the best post-punk songs ever, and for me it's only beaten by A Forest by The Cure in terms of its greatness in the post-punk genre. But again, a couple of quid in a charity shop in the 90s, I'm a happy fella. Talking of post-punk, this is one of the earliest kind of post-punk albums, I suppose, from 78. This is the debut album from Susie and the Banshees. Came out at the same time as Hong Kong Garden, although that's not on here, and I can understand why it probably wouldn't fit. But this is kind of metallic sounding album. The guitars from John McKay, are not riffy, but they're very distinctive. Incredibly distinctive voice, Susie, and this is a really good album, really good example of the post-punk genre, and again a great pickup in the early 90s from a charity shop. Now going back to a little bit further back in time into the 70s, and picking up this album was in the 90s, but this is a 70s album, and I'm not seen many albums by this band in charity shops. I think people keep hold of this band quite a lot, but I remember picking this one up, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, which is what something like their 5th album, I think. And I must admit, at the time I didn't really get it. I loved the first 4 albums, and if I have done a sort of a favourite 5 on Sabbath, and this doesn't actually feature in the top 5. And when I look at the track list, I think I don't know why it doesn't really. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, National Acrobat, Sabracadabra, Killing Yourself to Live, which is fantastic, Looking for Today, brilliant, Spiral Architect. It's a tremendous album. This is the album with Rick Wakeman on it. It's a bit more proggy actually as a Sabbath album, but a tremendous album. And again, fantastic charity shop find. When would you find an album like that in a charity shop nowadays? It's, you just don't see it. These albums here, these 5 albums are worth a reasonable amount of money individually. And when I looked at my Discogs list, they feature quite highly in the kind of medium price. First up is this one. Now, there was a time in the 90s where there was a lot of Beatles albums that you could pick up, especially things like Let It Be, Abbey Road, and this one. Not so much the very early ones. I've never seen very many of those, so people do hold on to those quite a lot. But this is a mono copy of Revolver, which is one of my favourite Beatles albums, in absolutely brilliant nick. And the vinyl is about an inch thick. Tremendous pickup from a charity shop. Now, round about these kind of early 90s, there was, in libraries, there used to be an opportunity to hire out CDs. And I used to get CDs out because I couldn't really afford to buy them most of the time. I used to burn copies of them like lots of people did on computers. And I remember getting really back into Jeff Beck via, CDs in the library. And then I remember going into a charity shop and seeing this. And I didn't realise this was Jeff Beck's first albums. I just picked it up because it was £1 or whatever it was. This is the first album from Jeff Beck Group, featuring Rod Stewart, featuring Ronnie Wood, Shape of Things, Let Me Love You, You Shook Me, Willie Dixon songs on here, Beck's Bolero, Ain't Superstitious. Fantastic blues album, which actually became the template for another band I picked up in a charity shop, and it's this one. Now, this is not a particularly collectible version of this, although it is on the orange and plum label. It's in beautiful condition. It's not with the turquoise writing or anything, but it is actually worth quite a bit of money. And back in the early 90s, you used to be able to pick up Led Zeppelin albums in charity shops. When's the last time anyone saw a Led Zeppelin album in a charity shop nowadays? When you see records like that at record fairs, they're like, £70 plus sometimes, which is ridiculous. The last 2, I remember picking these up and it was in a charity shop local to where I live. And one album was £1 and the other one was £2. And the reason one was £2 is because it's a double. So this was the £1 album. So Blues Breakers, John Mayall with Eric Clapton, often called the Beano album for obvious reasons. A tremendous blues album. All Your Love, Key to Love, Parchment Farm, Stepping Out. Just a brilliant, brilliant blues album for £1 in a charity shop. Imagine walking in and seeing something like that in a charity shop. Again, see that in a record shop and it's never in the racks, it's always on the wall, isn't it? And the last one, and this was £2, and the reason it was £2 is because it was a double. And not a single, and it's Jimi Hendrix, Electric Ladyland. Fantastic double album, just absolutely brilliant. £2. I haven't seen a Hendrix album in a charity shop for years, but you used to see quite a lot of his stuff in charity shops. This is the one with Voodoo Child on it. It's also got Crosstown Traffic, Burning of the Midnight Lamp is on here, Rainy Day Dream Away. It's just a fantastic album. £2. Oh, what a fantastic time to be alive the early 90s was when it came to record shopping. And a lot of the albums I've got were bought at around about that time, and nowadays I see them and they are just prohibitively expensive, which is such a shame, but there we are. Anyway, tell me what your best pickups at a charity shop are, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Cheers.